Welcome back, everyone. This is one part of a series of videos I'm doing on this 2006 Saturn Vue. Trying to give this thing a new lease on life, and it's got a little bit of a to-do list to get it kind of in tip-top shape. But I think once it's done, it's going to be a pretty good driver. So the car's not too bad a condition. You got your typical body rust here for a Midwest car to be expected. Actually in pretty good shape for 2006. And it's got about 160,000 miles on it, but still drives pretty well for the most part. If you recall from the first video I did on this car, the owner was complaining of a brake pulsation, which we eventually narrowed down to the rear brakes here. I was feeling it pretty strong in the brake pedal, which leads me to believe that the drums are warped, and we found leaking wheel cylinder, the shoes were getting pretty worn, and then of course that rusted brake line. So we want to make this nice and solid and safe for them to drive. Front brakes are in pretty good condition for right now. They might need to be touched in the next 6 months to a year or so, but not vital right now. So we're going to do the hoses. I'm going to show you how to do hoses, how to fabricate that rear line, since I don't think that's readily available pre-made. We're going to replace the wheel cylinder and then all the drums and shoe components, including all the hardware. So if this video is helpful to you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And let's get started. Probably the biggest piece of advice I can offer to you guys in doing drum brakes. Take a lot of pictures before you get started, especially if you're not familiar with how drum brakes are set up. They're usually pretty straightforward. Your trailing shoe, or the one on the back, is typically connected to your emergency brake cable via this bar right here. You can see the cable comes in down here, threads in, and then the bar attaches to the top. I think there's a little C-clip on the back. I'll show you that later. And then you basically just have two springs. And this is not typical for every single setup. This is what a lot of the modern drum brakes, I know they're kind of doing away with drum brakes altogether, but for the most part, you'll see an adjuster in the middle here. You have one spring up top. Should be a spring, yep, there it is down below. And then you'll have these spring-loaded cups that hold the shoes in place. So I like to start with the primary shoe, taking that apart since there's nothing really attached to it other than the two springs. I will take the little spring out up top here, take this cup out, everything will just kind of unravel, come out the backside, and you can almost keep it together in one piece and then detach it from the parking brake lever there. So take pictures before you get started. You can always try to do one side at a time. That way you have the other side as a reference. And I like to even just kind of set things down on the ground as they came off the car, just so you know where everything goes. Next piece of advice I can offer you, especially if you're replacing wheel cylinders, is you want to come back here. Show you this mounting hardware, and you want to make sure that those bolts, you can see one of them there, it's an 8mm bolt. You want to make sure that that stuff's going to be reusable, because if you're going to have to replace it, you're going to want to know before you get started, not when you're getting involved in it and you can't finish the project up because you're missing a bolt. So this one's going to put up a fight. I'm going to work on it, see if I can get it free. Worst case scenario, I might have to go to a hardware store or maybe the auto parts store with the new wheel cylinder and see if I can find a bolt that will match up. So here's my plan of attack for getting the drums apart. I'm going to try taking this top spring off of the adjuster first, and then that will loosen up the top part here. This cup will come off, and then the shoe will swing down and around because we got this big thick spring here. I really don't want to play with that if I can avoid it. So basically what I like to do is there's a perch down here that the shoes sit in. When I put it back on, you'll see I'll use that perch to kind of get some leverage to pull this spring into place. So let's go ahead and get this top one off first. So I've got a few specialty drum brake tools. It's not absolutely necessary to have these, but it does make your life a little easier. As far as these springs, I've had luck using needle nose pliers, especially if they're vice grip pliers. I'll go ahead and lock it on the spring like that. Oops, got my glove in there. Pull this spring out of the adjuster, and you want to be super careful working on drum brakes. I highly advise wearing some sort of eye protection just because of the springs. There's a lot of tension, a lot of energy built up in those springs, especially when they're in place. So that is one spring down right there. And we can free this cup. Of course, everything's nice and rusted together. And if you're looking to do an entire rear drum brake job, like the one I'm doing, you're definitely going to want to get 2 wheel cylinders. It's not often that you work on the rear drums. They're usually good for, I think, upwards of 80 to 100,000 miles, assuming that they've been maintained properly. But you're definitely going to want a hardware kit, 2 wheel cylinders, 1 set of shoes, 2 drums, and then if you need any brake line or hoses or anything like that, you'll probably have to buy bulk brake line and flare your own. We'll get to that in a second once I take everything apart. But yeah, so we got that one cup off. Let's see if we can squeak this shoe out of here. All right, so that spring is a pretty good size. It's kind of fighting me a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen this one. Spring cup here. Get the other side loosened. We'll take our adjuster out before it falls. You want to make sure that everything's moving nice and free there. That looks pretty good. I'm still going to go ahead and clean it up, grease up the insides of it. And there we have it. Now with this emergency brake lever here, you got 2 options. We can either pull this sheathing back and feed the cable up out, or you can leave it hang and just kind of work on it while it's on the car. I might try to pull this back and actually take it off the car just to make it a little easier to swap over that lever. Just have to pull this back enough. Or you can feed the lever up off the cable, like so. And there you can see we have this clip. We just need to get a flathead screwdriver in there, fan that out to remove that. Next step is to replace the wheel cylinder since we have everything off and out of the way. And then this brake line that comes from the brake hose. You can see since I'm replacing the brake hose, I'll just go ahead and put a pair of needle nose vice grips on there just to keep it from leaking fluid while the line's off. You don't really want to do that with an older hose in case you constrict it and then the tubing inside collapses and it might not open back up. But since we're replacing this hose anyway, it's whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and undo the flare nut here, and then there's 2 bolts behind to get the wheel cylinder off. And I've already loosened this flare nut here with a crow's foot wrench. You always want to use those. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier on brake lines, but since it's loose, we'll go ahead and use an open-ended wrench here just to make things a little faster. Chances are your wheel cylinder is going to be stuck on with a little bit of rust, so we'll just give it a nice whack. And out it comes. So I'm using this copper nickel-based brake line. Yeah, this is 3/16. I feel like most passenger cars are 3/16 for the most part. And the only real downside to using this kind of brake line is that sometimes the outer finish will kind of corrode down the line. It'll look a little funky under the car, but it still is, you know, structurally sound. The thing I like about using this the most is it's very soft. You can really bend it by hand, so you don't need a lot of special bending tools or anything like that. So we have our brake line here that we're going to try to replicate. The kit that I got came with some fittings, but they're funky size and they're not really playing nice with the wheel cylinder. So what we need to do, since these old fittings are still in decent shape, the brake line not so much, but the fittings I think we can salvage, we have to remove those from the brake line and reuse those on the new tubing. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this from the wheel cylinder, and then we'll cut these tube nuts off, I'm sorry, the flare nuts off, and then we'll attach them to the new brake line. All right, got our crow's foot. Tighten that down a little more first. Got our crow's foot wrench on there. Just kind of work this back and forth. I don't want to force it off in one movement because the rust might mess up some of the threads. So we're just going to kind of nurse it back and forth here. Finally starting to move a little bit. And if for some reason your flare nuts here are not in great shape, I would probably recommend seeing if you can get new ones before you even start the project. You don't want to be stuck halfway through and not be able to finish. You can always take your new wheel cylinder to an auto parts store or hardware store, see if you can match it up. All right, with that removed, we can get rid of our old wheel cylinder. We're going to mount our flare tool in the vise here. Now I had one on hand, but it decided to break on me during the first flare I did on the other side, so I ended up renting this from an auto parts store. So if you don't own one, it is an option to rent one from O'Reilly's or Advance Auto, one of those places. There's a couple ways you can get these flare nuts off. You can either drill out the end of the flare and then pull the tube right down, or I'm just going to go ahead and cut it off. Some side cuts. We'll just have to bend this back a little bit since it's kind of fanned out. Pliers might work a little better for this, actually, now that I think about it. All right, there's one side off. And this other one's kind of seized down there, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it off right behind the nut. And then we'll go ahead and mount this in our vise. Try to fan this back out with our pliers. Tubing that's still stuck inside. A little premature putting that in, I guess. You want to make sure you're grabbing it by the flats of the tube nut here. You don't want to hit any of the threads and risk damaging anything. There we go, both sides are free. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball how long of a section I need. We want to go a little bit longer than what we think we need, just to account for any errors in bending or anything like that. Or, you know, if you cut it and it doesn't flare the way you want it to, at least you can snip off your bad flare and reflare it without having to restart. So We'll give ourselves probably a few extra inches to work with. Get our tubing cutter on here and spin it. Every spin or two, we'll go ahead and tighten down that knob just to keep pressure on the cutting wheel. Voila. So your flare toolkit should come with these different hats here that you're going to use to perform the first flare. This is a double flare or inverted flare that is used on this car. And you can tell if you look inside, it's kind of hard to see on this old wheel cylinder, but if you look inside and you see kind of like a cone shape, then you know it's, as opposed to like a dome, then you know it's a double flare. So we want to make sure the hat fits inside both ends pretty well. I don't worry so much about this end because we're going to cut off the excess anyway. But one of the flare kits I had came with this nice deburring tool. You can just run that on the inside to get rid of any rough edges. And then if you have any burrs on the outside, you can run a file across the top and just make sure you blow away any metal fragments. So we're going to choose our 3/16 hole here in the block. For the flare tool, we want to do it just loosely where you can still slide the fitting or the brake line up and down. And we're going to take this first edge of the hat, match it up against the side of the brake hose there, the brake tube, and you want it to be just level. So once it's level with that first step of the hat, we're going to go ahead and crank these down. And if you're flaring something that's got a bunch of bends in it, you're going to want to get your brake tubing, or the brake fitting on first, because once you perform your flare, you're not going to be able to get it back on. But since we have a straight section right now, I can always feed it on from the back side. But I can't stress that enough to have your fittings on before you start flaring. So with that secured, we're going to stick our hat here right inside the brake pipe, feed our yoke on right in the middle. We're just going to go ahead and run that down until it goes flush with the surface of the block there. You don't need to go crazy tight. Once it bottoms out and gives you some resistance, that's good. You can back off. And then we'll go ahead and pull the hat off. You can see we got part of our flare, and to make it a double or inverted flare, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, but without that hat, just using the anvil here on the yoke. I'm going to stick that right in there. And same basic procedure, we're just going to kind of run it till it gets snug. We don't want to do it too tight. It's looking pretty good. Let's get it out of the block here. See what we're looking at. Now it doesn't have to be 100% perfect or symmetrical. This copper tubing is pretty forgiving in the way that once you start tightening it down with the flare nut behind it, it'll kind of press itself out and form to the surface, the mating surface inside the wheel cylinder, the brake hose. But overall, that's looking pretty good. If yours turns out really lopsided or kind of oblong, I'd recommend probably redoing it just to be on the safe side, because you don't want to go through trouble making this line and then finding out you have a leak down the line. So with that done, I'm going to go ahead and feed my fitting on. It's a pretty nice fit right there. And then we're going to go ahead, remember we cut off behind the fitting here, so we're going to go ahead and kind of eyeball this and see if we can recreate this line. I always bend it with my two thumbs kind of butted up against each other if you don't have like a bending tool. This is a pretty good technique to not kink the line. You don't really want much more of a gradual 90-degree angle than that, or else you might risk causing some sort of kink or restriction in the brake pipe. Flare that out just a little more. A gradual curve. Like I said, this stuff is super forgiving to work with. So that first bend's looking pretty good. Then we'll come along this way. I just kind of want to get in the neighborhood of where the other connection is. The other side wasn't perfect. I didn't have this little kink here, but I was able to bend it once I got it in place enough to get it to fit. So that's looking pretty good to me. We're going to go ahead and cut it. Say, what time you have the flare knot? Probably like right here. We'll have a little bit extra to work with, but we can always massage the line out to make up for any slack if it's going to get in our way. So I'm going to put my tubing cutter on there. We're just going to double check this by eye before I cut. Bring it in a little bit there just so we have too much extra. That should be good. All right, that's cut. Get our deburring tool on the inside there. Now this is super crucial. Don't forget this part. Tube nut goes on before you flare it, because otherwise you're not getting it back on later. Don't see any burrs. Looking good there, so go ahead and mount it in the block. Line this up with our hat. Lock down our block. Insert the hat. Then we'll do our first pass here with the yoke and the hat. Get my glove out of there. Get some resistance, so we're going to back off. Remove the hat, and then just run the yoke. If I sound tired, guys, I am. I just spent 3 hours beating the wheel bearing off of this car, so that one's not going to make for good watching, so I'm probably not going to show you a video on that one this time around. Got our resistance there, so we'll run it back out. And there you have it. Let's line this up next to our old one, see what it looks like. I'm feeling pretty good about that. So we're going to go ahead and mount this to our new wheel cylinder. We'll bolt the wheel cylinder into the car, and then this other line we can kind of, like I said, massage it and get it into place however we need it. I don't want to tighten this too much because I want to be able to spin the line if I need to install it in the car. Okay, we're going to feed this through the hole here. You don't have to do this. You could mount the wheel cylinder first and install the line later if you really wanted to. I just like to make life difficult for myself. We'll go ahead, thread this into the hose just enough where the threads are started. I don't want to tighten this down because we're going to be taking that hose right back off. Enough to kind of anchor it, and then I'm going to go ahead. You can see the line's fighting me from getting the wheel cylinder in flush, so we're going to go ahead and kind of massage this a little bit. Until we can get our wheel cylinder in place. I'm liking that. Biggest thing is back here, make sure the line's not contacting anything, any suspension components. You can always, once you get everything mounted, kind of just push a line in various directions to get it out of the way if it's going to hit anything. You don't want it rubbing over time and creating a leak. So now we have our 2 mounting bolts for the wheel cylinder. Get those started by hand so I don't strip them out. And we just want to do those snug. If you go too tight, you more than likely will snap those bolts off, so don't go too tight with them. But you do want them snug enough where it's not going to cause any issues for the brake system. That's a pretty important component right there. You want that tight. So with the wheel cylinder mounted in place, I'm just going to take a wrench. You want to index these plungers here on the wheel cylinder straight up and down. Shoes are going to fit right in there. So the hose, I don't know if I'm going to show that. I might just skip right to the shoes. That's as simple as pulling out these 2 clips. There's one here and one here. Just get something in there you can pry them out with. I'd recommend probably leaving this side connected. That way you can leave your vice grips on to prevent any brake fluid from leaking out. And then you can go ahead and attach your new hose on this side and then deal with this all at once so you're not leaking out too much fluid at once and creating more work for yourself to bleed the system out. To prepare the backing plate for the new shoes, I'm going to go ahead and take a die grinder. You could take like a piece of sandpaper or a wire brush. And there's 6 little pedestals here. You can see where the shoes ride on. There's a little bit of rust buildup, so we want to get those as smooth as possible. I'm going to go ahead and grind those down, get rid of that surface rust, and then take our brake clean. We're just going to spray down everything, get everything as clean as possible, get as much of this rust and dirt out of here. There's some little rust kind of flake buildup in various places. I'm going to take a wire brush and work that down just so it doesn't get in the way of our new shoes. So first things first, before we start reinstalling anything, I'm going to take some Seal Glide or some other, whatever kind of brake lubricant you have. It's going to go on all 6 of these pedestals here. Those spots come in contact. I don't know if you can see that with the back side of the shoe there. And it's going to ride right on those. So every time you push the brakes, those shoes are moving around. You're going to want that lubed up and as clean as possible. Now, in addition to that, we have to transfer this lever for the parking brake cable over. That's as simple as undoing this little horseshoe clip or C-clip on the back here. You just take a flat head in there, fan it out, and then kind of work it off. We do have a new one that came with our hardware kit, so that's nice. The arm will just come right off, feed through a hole on the new shoe, and then our new clip will go over. Use a pair of side cuts or needle nose pliers to pinch that back into place. Once that's done, we're going to take our adjuster. If your adjuster is looking really rusty and it's seized up, I'd probably recommend just getting a new one. But this one's still got some movement to it, so we're going to go ahead and take it apart, spray it down with brake clean. Any rusty areas I might take a wire brush to, and then we're going to put some Seal Glide in here too as well, just to make sure everything's moving nice and free before we reinstall it. Don't be afraid to get a little aggressive with these things. We're replacing it anyway, so it doesn't matter if we damage it in the process. I'm getting it off. Trying not to stab myself in the hand here. This thing's putting up a fight. go ahead and wire brush all this contact area down. You can see it makes contact with the back side of the shoe here, so we want to make sure this is nice and clean. And then I'll throw a little bit of Silk Glide on there too, just to lubricate it. Got our new washer and our new clip. These will fight you going back on, but there is a groove there that it should slide into. See if we can persuade this in. Take it the rest of the way with our pliers. And then we're just going to pinch those ends closed. And there it is. That is ready to go back in our car. Don't want a ton of Silk Glide in here, just enough to get a light coating and lubricate everything and prevent rust buildup. Otherwise the excess will probably push out when we go to reinstall everything. We'll go ahead and run this down all the way since I know my new shoes are going to be bigger or have more material on them than the old ones. So we'll have to play around and get them dialed in. But there is our adjuster. You can hold both ends. Try spinning that wheel in the middle and that looks pretty good. So those are ready to go back in the car. I'm going to go ahead and snug up our brake fitting here only because I'm going to borrow these vice grips. Obviously if you have another pair, that would be helpful, but I like using these needle nose vice grips for the springs on the drum brakes. And if I didn't mention before, you definitely want to wear some sort of eye protection with these drum components. These springs are pretty powerful and they don't play. So if one of them comes loose and goes the wrong way, they're going straight for your face. It's better safe than sorry there. But what I'm going to do is start with the trailing shoe. We have to get the emergency brake cable mounted right back in. I doubt the emergency brake cables are even working on this car anymore. So 2006, it's probably rusted out pretty good. But we're gonna get our vice grips on there. Pull this little wire sheathing back if it'll let us. Maybe I got that too tight. There we go. We're going to expose some of the cable there. We're going to feed it right into this notch bottom of the shoe. Of course. Drum brakes are one of those instances where it would be really nice to have a third arm, a third hand, because there's a lot going on at once. So now that our trailing shoe is connected to the emergency brake cable, we're going to go ahead and mount it in place. Make sure it's sitting inside the perch behind this little plate here and indexed with our notch in the wheel cylinder up top there. Feed our pin through the back side. This is tricky trying to keep everything in place here with your right hand while also trying to line up the cup and spring with your left as it wobbles all over inside the tool. All right, we're gonna get our notch lined up on the pin there. Actually, I'm gonna change hands here. Almost had it. There it is. So that one's in place. And I like doing the big scary spring at the bottom before the one up top. Actually, I think the one up top's more scary than the one at the bottom personally, but go ahead and hook it. Look at my old shoe, it looks like it comes over the top with the primary shoe. And we could just feed it right behind here. There's a hole right there where it's gonna line up to. Actually, you know what? We're gonna line this one up first. So that's gonna hook in the back side of the secondary shoe. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put this behind the hub, hook it into the front of the primary shoe. We have to get this behind the plate here. So this way you get a little bit of leverage. And now I can leverage it on this plate, pull it back into place like so. So we're gonna go ahead, anchor this one down, pin, spring, and cup. In place. Next thing to do is put in our adjuster. The arm for the adjuster, which is going to sit right on this notch up here, and then put in our spring up top, and we'll be good to go to mount the drum and get everything adjusted. So there's a few different notches here on our adjusting, on our shoe adjuster, and you're going to have the one big one here. It's going to go just into the shoe and the bracket. And then notice there's two notches here, a big one and a little one. The little one's going to go inside that arm. So we're going to go ahead, that arm can go in after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and fan this out. Just enough. I don't want to adjust it out too much just yet, because when I get tension on with the spring, I think it's going to kind of suck everything in together. We'll go ahead and put our bracket on for the adjuster. This is going to sit on that little pin up top, and then this one's going to sit inside the small notch on the adjusting arm. And this arm here is going to bump up against the star gear that's on the adjuster to actually make the adjustment. There we go, that's looking good. All right, then we're gonna hook this top spring. I'm sorry, this actually goes in like that. Grab my needle nose vice grips, and that's gonna sit right in the notch on that adjusting arm. And there it is. Just gonna kind of bump everything into place. Make sure everything's sliding back and forth without too much effort. Now we can go ahead and install our drum. So now we have our new drum on. Last thing to do is to adjust them. And it's hard to do until you've taken the car for a thorough test drive or gotten the wheel back on, but I'll kind of try to push the drum on as tight as possible by hand. And I have the adjusters usually gone down all the way just because we have a lot more material in the new shoes. So we're going to leave our plug out in the back. There's a little rubber plug that goes behind here, and I have my shoe adjusting tool that's going to feed through the slot in the back. And basically you're going to catch the flat side of that star adjuster, and as we're spinning this by hand, you won't feel any resistance at all originally, but as the shoes eventually start expanding out, they're going to start just barely contacting the inside of the drum. And I usually get it to the point where you can still turn it by hand, but they're dragging ever so slightly. You don't want them really dragging too much, because then, you know, there's basically like the brakes are applied all the time. But you want them to the point where they're just starting to touch and it's just a little bit of drag. So I'll double check this once I get the wheel on. But another thing too is you can do a couple hard stops in reverse, and that should allow the adjusters to kind of do their job. And other than that, we're just going to road test it, make sure our brake pulsation is gone, and we'll see what happens from there. There you have it, guys. There's our rear brakes overhauled on this Saturn Vue. We've got new drums, shoes, hardware, wheel cylinders, brake line, and hoses. So I think the rear brakes are pretty much good to go for the rest of the life of this vehicle. We'll just have to make sure to check them from time to time, either taking it into a shop or doing it ourselves, and adjust those brakes and make sure we're getting the best life out of them and maximizing them as long as possible. So, all right, real quick before I let you guys go, I just wanted to circle back and touch on something real quick. Unfortunately, if you saw the first video in this series, you know that I had to return the Saturn Vue to the owner a little sooner than I anticipated. So I was not able to film the test drive and the last few repairs in the vehicle. But basically I did take it for a test drive, and the front suspension stuff's all great. I did run into a slight issue with the rear brakes. Rear brakes are a lot better, but there is still a little bit of a pulsation in the brake pedal. And I have had this happen many times before with drum brakes. Basically what happens is the drums sit in storage for so long, or they get bounced around in shipping, that they get out of round. And unfortunately I didn't notice it until after the fact when I got the drums on the car. So there is still a little bit of a brake pulsation, but what I'm going to do is get the customer back as soon as possible, hopefully in the next couple of days, and we're going to get those drums either machined at their shop, which is actually surprisingly hard to do nowadays. I've called around just about every parts store and garage in the area, and everybody sold their brake lays. So it's going to take a little bit of time to find a place that'll do it without breaking the bank. But I definitely think it's worth salvaging the brand new drums. If you are doing this project on a weekend, you're going into it, it might be worth, for all this work, especially since you might not touch the drum brakes again as long as you have that car, it might be worth having the drums checked beforehand. Maybe find a brake shop or some sort of shop that has the ability to machine drum brakes, and have them turn the drums for, you know, it might be, I don't know, 20 to 40 bucks per drum. But at least that way you know that they're round and they're true, and they're not gonna, you know, pulsate on you when you go through all this trouble and put it all back together. So it might be worth taking that time up front to take the parts somewhere and have them checked out. And that way you can just, you know, start to finish and be done with it by the time you get everything wrapped up. I think the only thing that I forgot to cover, and this is kind of a big one, was bleeding the brakes. When you replace those wheel cylinders, obviously you have to bleed the brakes. So basically what I did in this case is you crack the bleeder screws at the top, put a hose on them to collect the brake fluid. I always start at the right rear since it's the furthest channel away from the master cylinder, and just wait till the fluid starts dripping out. I'm sorry that I didn't show that on video. I can't believe that I missed that, but I'm gonna do, if I ever do another drum brake video, I'll be sure to cover all that in greater detail and correct some of the goofy camera angles I think I had in this video. But I think there was enough information in this video that I still wanted to keep it and share it with you guys. So hopefully you still found it helpful to some extent. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for this video, and that's going to do it for the series of videos on this 2006 Saturn Vue. We saved the car from getting sent to the scrap heap early, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. And the customer ended up saving some money and not having to go car searching, so I think everybody's pretty pleased all around. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving me a like. Check out the other videos on the channel. I appreciate your support, and until next time, we'll see ya. Thanks.